In this game, Robert Fischer demonstrated how to get a position with a good knight against bad bishop and how to convert this positional advantage. He played white in this game, so e4, c5, this is Sicilian defense, knight takes, knight f6, knight c3, a6, neither variation. The idea is to take under control the b5 square and prepare the pawn advance on the queen side with some activity. After b5, the b4 would be a threat, disturbing the knight on c3, which in its turn defends e4. So black would exert some pressure in the center. The bishop from b7 can join this pressure. So this is black's main idea in neither variation. White, the common moves are bishop g5 or bishop e3 or bishop e2 or bishop c4, which was Fischer's favorite. So usually bishop e2 and or bishop e3 is followed by e5, which is another main idea of Najdorf variation, to fight for the center actively and take under control the important central squares. Fischer in this position made a less common move, which is h3. The idea is to respond to black's advance on the queen side with the advance on the king side. As black will most probably castle king side, this can turn into the pawn storm on the king side. And another idea of h3 is to make the common idea, which is e5 in the Najdorf, problematic, because now if black plays e5, Fischer in his book My Memorable 60 Games gives the following variations. So knight would retreat to e2, and after the most natural bishop e7, developing the bishop and preparing castle king side, white would immediately start the advance on the king side, g4, and after castles play knight g3, taking under control the f5 square and actually threatening to jump there. That's why g6, and now g5. Another idea of knight g3 is also take under control the h5 square, so that after g5, knight cannot jump to h5 and is forced to go to e8, where it is passive. And white would just continue the pawn storm, h4, threatening h5, opening the h-file. That's why black must do something. However, there isn't much black can do. For example, if f6, that would open the important diagonal, so bishop c4 check, king g7, h5 opening the h-file, fg, hg, hg, and now just knight h5 check. If king goes to the h-file, that would lead to a very unpleasant x-ray, and knight would be able to jump with a check. And if black takes, then after queen takes h5, the catastrophe on h-file is inevitable. And if instead of bishop e7, black makes another natural looking move, which is bishop e6, taking under control the d5 square and preparing, liberating d5, getting rid of the weakness, backward d6 pawn and opening bishop's diagonal, white would still play g4. And after d5, he takes, knight takes, bishop g2. So another idea of g4 is also fianchetto of the bishop. Bishop is very active. Now the black knight is under attack, and if it moves, b7 falls. So the bishop on g2 exerts a tremendous pressure on the whole diagonal. And if black takes on c3, after all these mass exchanges of queen, and knights, b7, it would be very problematic because for black, because b7 would be under pressure and the knight on g2 would be very strong. So that's why after h3, black didn't play e5 and played knight c6. Now g4, knight takes, queen takes, and now e5. However, this typical move for Najdorf, e5, has serious drawbacks. Uh, it makes d pawn backward, and also it weakens the d5 square. As you see, black doesn't have a pawn on c file, which can take part in the defense of d5 square, and the e pawn has advanced already on e5, so black cannot defend d5 square with pawns and can defend it only with pieces. And if white managed to exchange the bishops for the defenders of the d5 square, namely for the knight, f6 knight, and the light square bishop, then white will have a strategically winning position, because the remaining pieces, light pieces, would be a knight and a dark square bishop, and knight would be centralized and would be placed perfectly, controlling very important squares on both the queen side and the king side. And the dark square bishop would be bad because it would be limited by its own pawns on the dark squares, and it won't be able to be exchanged because the knight on d5 would be on a light square. And the position would be strategically winning for white. And that's exactly what Fischer will achieve in this game. So after e5, the queen is under attack. So queen d3, bishop e7, g5, knight d7, bishop e3. And here black makes a mistake. Black makes the most natural looking move, knight c5, at first sight activating the knight with tempo, attacking the queen. However, the knight isn't doing anything on this active looking square, as e4 is defended by the c3 knight, and white would also play f3, fortifying e4, and the knight doesn't take part in the defense of the key d5 square on c5. That's why this knight c5 move was a mistake, and instead it would be better to take on g5. However, of course, this doesn't win a pawn, as bishop from e7 was defending d6 pawn, and after it moved away, after the exchange, d6 falls, and the queen doesn't let black castle. That's why queen e7. And after the exchange and knight d5 check, knight would be centralized with tempo, and the king cannot go to e8, for example, because of the fork. And if it goes to d6, then after castles, there would be very unpleasant x-ray. So king f8, castles, g6. Of course, this position white is better, but it's not winning, it's just some advantage. So it was better to play bishop takes g5 instead of knight c5. So knight c5 attacked the queen, queen d2, now g5 is defended, bishop e6 taking under control, d5 square, castles. Now you see this tremendous pressure that white has on the d file. Castles, f3, fortifying e4, rook c8, creating some pressure on c file. King b1, the prophylactic move, moving away the king from this c file. And black understood that the knight isn't doing anything on c5 and played knight d7, rerouting it to b6, from where it would defend d5 square. h4, Fischer just continues his pawn storm on king side, b5. And now Fischer made a very strong move, a positional move, which I offer you to find. And while thinking, keep in mind what Fischer wants to do. He wants to exchange his bishops for the defenders of d5 square. And with his next move, he starts doing that. So the move is bishop h3. preparing the exchange of bishops. Of course, white isn't going to take on e6, as black would take with a pawn, and pawn from e6 would control d5 square. Besides that, the f file where white has weakness would open. However, black is almost forced to exchange on h3. Which black actually did. So the next move was bishop takes h3. Let's look what would have happened if black decided to avoid this. For example, Fischer gives the following variations. If knight b6, then just bishop takes b6, exchanging the one defender of d5. Queen takes b6 and knight d5. And as you see now, bishop cannot takes the knight, as black would lose the exchange in this case. So that was one of the idea of bishop h3 move. It's very active on this diagonal. And if after knight d5, knight d5 attacked the queen and the bishop, as you see. So if queen d8, then just exchange of bishop, and white is a pawn up this position. And if rook e8 instead of exchange on h3, then just knight d5 attacking the bishop, bishop f8 and h5. As you see, white is ready to crush the king side, while black's counterattack on the queen side, it's very late, there are no threats, and here white is winning. That's why after bishop h3, black took on h3. However, it's, as I said, is in white's favor as one of the most important defenders of the d5 square is exchanged after this move. So rook takes h3, and now knight b6. And of course, in order to defend d5, to prevent knight d5, but of course Fischer immediately exchanges this knight for another bishop, and this position is strategically winning for white. So knight d5, centralizing the knight with tempo, attacking the queen and bishop, and as you see, bishop is very bad, while knight is absolutely great on this square. And this knight, as you will see, would create a lot of problems for black, restraining it and preventing black from making the most natural, active moves. So queen must defend the bishop, so queen d8, and now f4. The idea is to play f5 and then just destroy the king side by playing f6 or after or h5, g6, and so on. Of course, instead of f4, it would be a terrible blunder to play knight takes e7, let alone positionally. It's bad, exchanging the great knight for the terrible bishop, but if the idea was to win a pawn after the exchange, it doesn't work, because after queen takes, there is a rook d8 move. As you see, white has back rank issues, and after, if queen moves or takes on e7, then just checkmate. That's why Fischer played f4. Now f5 is a threat, that's why black took on f4, queen takes f4, queen d7 attacking the rook, and queen f5 attacking the queen, because the queen cannot take on f5, because that would lead to knight takes bishop check, and white is a piece up. And as the queen is under attack, if black defends it with f rook, black is losing exchange in this case after queen takes, rook takes, knight b6 with a fork. That's why after queen f5, black defended the queen with c rook, moving away this rook from the open file, which isn't so good, but black is forced. And now Fischer made a move that at first sight is strange, as white is pawn storming, attacking on the king side. However, uh, using the fact that black doesn't have any active play and there is nothing black can do, Fischer changed his plans and starts attacking the weakness on the queen side. Rook a3, attacking the a6 pawn. Queen a7, defending it, and now rook c3, threatening to play rook c7 with a double attack, winning the bishop. Of course, instead of rook c3, it was possible to exchange the light pieces and go to get an absolutely winning endgame. After knight takes, queen takes, rook a6, white is a pawn up and positionally is much better, so this is absolutely winning. If black plays rook e8 attacking e4, white can play a4, opening the escape square for the king, and also after b takes a, rook takes a4, e4 would be defended, and black has a weakness on d6, and there are some threats on the king side, so this position would be absolutely winning for white. But Fischer didn't want to play endgame, he wanted to finish his opponent in the middle game. So he played rook c3 with a terrible threat, rook c7. So black played g6, attacking the queen. If instead of g6, black played rook d7, for example, defending from rook c7, white would have played knight f6 check. If king moves, then of course queen h7 checkmate. That's why black must take either with a pawn or with a bishop. So if pawn takes, then pawn takes, opening g file. This is terrible for black. And here, if king, if the bishop takes, then queen takes with inevitable checkmate on g3. And if king h8, then just f takes with double attack, threatening taking on f6, and also check on f6 with checkmate on g file. And if after knight f6 bishop takes f6, then just g takes f, threatening queen g5 with checkmate. And if g6, then queen g5, threatening checkmate in 2. And king h8 doesn't help, because after queen h6, rook g8, white has a beautiful move, rook c8, pinning the rook and threatening checkmate. And if black takes the rook, then of course again checkmate, so checkmate on g7 is inevitable in this case. That's why after rook c3, black played g3. Now queen g4, queen d7, white doesn't want to exchange queens, queen f3. And if white is threatening to play rook c7, winning the bishop. And the most natural move, rook c8, doesn't work, again, because of the knight on d5. White would just take on c8, and if queen takes, then of course fork. And if rook takes, then comes knight b6, again fork, and white is exchange up. So as you see, because of this great knight, black cannot make the most natural moves in order to defend. So that's why black played queen e6. Now rook c7, threatening to take on e7. If rook d7, that loses immediately. After knight f4, attacking the queen. Queen has to defend the rook. However, it's impossible because there are no squares on this diagonal to retreat. And after queen e5, black is losing rook. And if rook f e8, defending the bishop, then just rook f1 with serious pressure. and on f file, and also rook a7 is a threat, getting a pawn. And if black, for example, plays rook c8, then rook a7, rook a8, defending the pawn. However, it loses again, thanks to the great knight with a fork. So after rook c7, black played rook d e8, defending the bishop. Knight f4 attacking the queen, queen e5, and now rook comes to the weak d5 square, attacking the queen and forcing it to a very passive square. And now, as black again doesn't have any active plan, any active moves, white doesn't hurry and just plays a3, opening the escape square for the king in order to solve the back rank issues that might arise. And now again, rook a7 is a threat, so black must do something relatively active, otherwise white would just gradually demolish the queen side. So that's why h6. However, it doesn't work. G takes h. If bishop takes h4, then knight takes g6, and after f takes g, queen b3 with a terrible discovered check threat. King cannot move away from this discovery. That's why the only way is rook f7. However, it loses after a terrible rook f5, putting a rook under attack. However, the catastrophe on f7 is inevitable, as the rook is pinned and white is attacking 3 times, and there is no way black can defend f7. So after g takes f, just checkmate on f7, queen f7 checkmate. That's why after g takes h, queen takes h6. And Fischer played h5, creating more weaknesses on the king side. If black plays g5, that would terribly weaken the f5 square, and the knight would go to e2, and then either from d4 or g3 would jump to f5 with terrible consequences for black. That's why after h5, black played bishop g5, attacking the knight and threatening to win a piece. And now Fischer made a beautiful move. Actually, for this game he won the first prize for first beauty prize. The sharp tactical phase of this game starts. So I offer you to pause the video and try to find Fischer's move. So he didn't retreat with his knight, leaving the knight under attack, and played h takes g. Now, if black takes the piece, then after g takes f, check with a fork, forcing black to take on f7. Then after rook takes f7, king takes f7, rook h5, attacking the queen. And the queen is defending the bishop, so after queen moves, white would just take the bishop with check and with the terrible threats to black king. And the only way to retreat the queen, keeping the defense, is queen f6. However, it doesn't work because of rook f5 with a pin winning a queen. And actually in this position you can see the importance of a3 move, because if the pawn was still on a2 in this position, rook f5 wouldn't work, because black would be able to take a rook in this case, and after he takes f, rook e1 would be a checkmate. However, now it's just a check and white can escape, and it doesn't work. So after h takes, black didn't take the knight and played f takes g. However, after f takes g, you see the knight is pinned and it would be lost inevitably at first sight. However, here after f takes g, black weakened this diagonal, and Fischer immediately uses it by playing queen b3, leaving the knight under attack and creating terrible discovered check threats. Now if bishop takes f4, then just rook h5 check, winning the queen. And if king moves away from this terrible x-ray, king h8, then just knight takes g5 check with a fork, black is forced to take, and then just rook takes g5, queen takes, and queen h3 check with a checkmate next move. That's why black took with a rook. However, it is losing too because of rook e5 check. Now the rook on e8 is under attack. That's why king f8 defending it. However, rook takes, king takes, and queen e6 check, and black is losing. So king f8. Actually, in this position, black resigned already because of queen c8 check and checkmate next move.